The lie that wore a uniform. My brother told my parents I washed out of the army on a Tuesday. I was in Kandahar when it happened. I didn't find out until 3 months later, when I came home expecting a welcome and got a door slammed in my face instead. That was 9 years ago. My name is Sunita Marshall. I am a major in the United States Army. I have served 2 combat deployments, trained soldiers who went on to save lives, and stood in places most people only see in nightmares. I have held dying men in my arms and whispered that everything was going to be okay even when I knew it wasn't. I have never once washed out of anything. But my brother Daniel told my parents I did, and for 9 years, they believed him. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with the lie. It starts long before that. It starts with 2 children growing up in the same house, eating at the same table, and being told by the same father that only one of them was destined for greatness. Daniel was older. Daniel was the golden boy. Daniel had the charm, the smile, the handshake that made men trust him and women adore him. Our father looked at Daniel the way men look at mirrors, with deep, satisfying recognition. And then there was me. I was quiet. I was serious. I read books Daniel never touched and asked questions Daniel never thought to ask. I didn't want to be admired. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to matter in a way that went beyond a dinner table compliment or a proud photograph on the mantle. When I was 17, I told my parents I wanted to join the army. My mother cried. My father frowned. Daniel laughed. "You," he said, looking at me across the kitchen table like I had just announced I was moving to the moon. "You're going to be a soldier." I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I just looked at him with the kind of calm that I didn't know yet would become my greatest weapon, and I said, "Yes." 3 weeks after my 18th birthday, I signed the papers. Basic training was the hardest thing I had ever done, and the best thing that had ever happened to me. I discovered something in those first brutal weeks that no one in my family had ever told me, that I was strong. Not just physically, though that came too, but mentally, emotionally. I had a threshold for pain and discomfort that surprised even my instructors. I could be broken down and built back up and come back the next morning ready for more. I excelled. That is not arrogance, that is simply the truth. I called home when I could. My mother always answered, always asked if I was eating, always told me to be careful. My father was warmer than I expected, asking about my progress, sounding something close to proud. Daniel never picked up the phone. I made it through basic. I made it through advanced training. I was assigned to my first unit and deployed to Afghanistan at 22 years old. I was terrified, and I was ready. The lie happened during my first deployment. I was 7 weeks into the most intense experience of my life when Daniel called my parents and told them I had been discharged. Not honorably, not quietly. He told them I had broken down during training, that I had failed psychological evaluations, that the Army had sent me home in disgrace, and I was too ashamed to tell them myself. He told them I had been lying about my service, that I was unstable, that they should not try to contact me because I needed space to deal with my failure. He painted a picture of a daughter they didn't recognize, fragile and broken, and hiding somewhere in shame. And my parents, who loved me but had always found me slightly mysterious, slightly hard to read, slightly not quite what they expected, they believed him. Why would Daniel lie? He was their son. He had no reason to make something like that up. And hadn't Sunita always been a little difficult to understand? Hadn't she always kept things to herself? So when my letters stopped reaching them, because Daniel had quietly changed their address in my contact file and intercepted what he could, and when my calls went to a number that had been changed without my knowledge, my parents simply thought I was hiding. And they gave me space. For 9 years. I found out 3 months after the lie was told. I came home from my first deployment expecting a family. I got silence. I drove to my parents' house and knocked on the door, and my mother opened it with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something between grief and anger and a terrible, exhausted disappointment. "Sunita," she said, just my name, like it cost her something to say it. "Mom," I was still in my uniform. I had driven straight from the base. "I'm home." She looked at the uniform like she didn't believe it was real, like it was a costume. "Your brother told us," she said. I didn't know what she meant. Not yet. "Told you what?" "That you washed out." Her voice was very quiet. "That you had a breakdown, that you've been lying to us this whole time." The world went very still. I stood on my parents' porch in my uniform, with 7 weeks of combat still sitting behind my eyes, and I tried to understand what I was hearing. "That's not true," I said. "Mom, that is not true. I just got back from Afghanistan. I have been deployed. I have been serving." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her face that broke a part of me I didn't know could break. She wasn't sure who to believe. Daniel had gotten there first. Daniel had built the story carefully, brick by brick, and my mother was standing inside it and the walls were thick. "I think you need to give us some time," she said. She closed the door. I could have fought it then. I should have fought it then. But I was 22 years old, and I had just come home from war, and the door my mother just closed felt heavier than anything I had faced in Afghanistan. I went back to base. I threw myself into work. I told myself I would fix it when I had the strength. I told myself I would gather evidence, sit my parents down, show them the truth. But the Army doesn't wait for your personal life to settle. I was redeployed. And then again. And in between deployments, there was training and assignments and a career that was moving faster than I expected because it turned out I was very good at this. I got promoted. I got decorated. I built a life that my parents knew nothing about. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I met a man named James, and we fell in love the way soldiers fall in love, quickly and completely, and with the full understanding that nothing is guaranteed. We got married on a Saturday in October with 12 people present. My parents were not among them. And then our daughter was born. We named her Grace. My parents had a granddaughter they didn't know existed. The years have a way of hardening around a wound if you let them. The pain doesn't disappear. It calcifies. It becomes part of the structure of you, and you learn to carry it without limping, and eventually you almost forget it's there. Almost. I thought about my parents every deployment. Every time I put on my uniform. Every time Grace laughed or took a step or said something that sounded like wisdom coming out of a 3-year-old's mouth. I thought about the grandparents who would have loved her desperately if only they knew she existed. I thought about Daniel, too. Daniel, who had built a career of his own, who had gone into private contracting after a brief stint in the military reserves. A stint, I would later learn, that had ended with his own quiet dismissal for conduct unbecoming. Daniel, who had spent 9 years benefiting from my absence, who had become the one my parents called first, the one they leaned on, the one who filled the space my brother had carved out for himself by removing me from it. I knew all of this. I kept tabs from a distance, not obsessively, just enough to know what I was dealing with. I was waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew that the moment would come. Truth doesn't disappear, it waits too. The moment came on a Wednesday in March. I was in my office on base when my commanding officer called me in and told me I had been assigned as a military advisor to a disciplinary hearing the following month. A contractor had been flagged for misrepresentation of military credentials and conduct violations. The hearing was serious. Careers were ending. He slid the file across the desk. I looked at the name. Daniel Marshall. My brother. I sat very still for a moment. My commanding officer was watching me with the careful attention of a man who had learned to read soldiers' faces. "You know him?" he asked. "He's my brother," I said. There was a pause. "Do you need to recuse yourself?" I thought about 9 years. I thought about a door closing in my face. I thought about Grace, who had never met her grandparents. I thought about my mother's voice saying your brother told us, and the way she hadn't been sure who to believe. "No," I said, "I don't." I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. I requested my full dress blues be pressed and ready. I confirmed the hearing location, the time, the seating arrangements. I made one phone call to a friend who knew how to get a message to my parents without involving Daniel. The message was simple. Your son Daniel is facing a military disciplinary hearing on April 14th at Fort Belvoir. You may want to be there. Sunita. I didn't know if they would come. I told myself I had made my peace with either outcome. I had gotten very good at telling myself things like that over the years. April 14th was a clear morning. Cold, the way Virginia mornings can be in early spring, the sky a hard, bright blue that makes everything look sharper than it is. I arrived early. I was in my full dress blues, the dark jacket, the brass buttons, the ribbons and decorations that represented 9 years of service and sacrifice, and showing up even when every part of you wanted to stop. My name was on my chest, Major Sunita Marshall. Every medal I had earned was exactly where it was supposed to be. I stood outside the hearing room and I breathed. The doors opened at 9. I walked in. I heard my mother before I saw her. Not words, just a sound, a sharp, sudden intake of breath, the kind that happens when the body receives information the mind hasn't caught up to yet. The kind of sound a person makes when something they thought was one thing turns out to be something completely different. I turned toward it. My parents were seated in the third row, my father in a gray suit, my mother in the blue coat she had owned for as long as I could remember. They were both looking at me with expressions I had never seen on their faces before. My mother's hand was over her mouth. My father's hands, resting on his knees, were shaking. I looked at them for a moment, just a moment, long enough for them to see the uniform, the rank, the medals, the name. Long enough for 9 years of Daniel's lie to start collapsing under the weight of what was standing in front of them. Then I turned and took my seat at the advisor's table. I had a job to do. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Daniel's violations were read aloud. Misrepresentation of military service on federal contracting documents. Conduct violations during his reserve tenure that had been quietly buried until now. A pattern of behavior that the military takes very seriously and the law takes even more seriously. Daniel sat across the room and did not look at me for the first hour. In the second hour, he glanced over once. I looked back at him with the same calm I had been practicing since I was 17 years old, and I held his gaze until he looked away. I did not smile. I did not need to. When the hearing concluded, and Daniel was escorted out to await the formal decision, I stood and turned. My parents were still in their seats. My mother was crying without making a sound, the tears running down her face in the quiet, helpless way of someone who has run out of words. My father had not stopped shaking. I walked to them. I stopped in front of them and I stood straight, the way the army had taught me, and I let them look at me, all of me, the uniform and the rank and the evidence of everything they had missed. My mother reached up and took my hand. "Sunita," she whispered. "I'm here, Mom," I said. "I've always been here." My father stood up slowly, the way old men stand when their bones are remembering every year they've lived. He looked at my face, and then at the medals on my chest, and then back at my face. His chin was trembling. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was the voice of a man being hollowed out and filled back up at the same time. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." I had practiced being strong for so long that I almost made it. Almost. I cried in my father's arms for the first time since I was a little girl, standing in a military hearing room in my full dress blues, with 9 years of silence finally breaking open between us. My mother held my hand and didn't let go. We stood there for a long time. 3 weeks later, my parents met Grace for the first time. She walked up to my mother with the fearless confidence of a child who has never been told the world is dangerous, and put both hands on my mother's face and said, very seriously, "You have kind eyes." My mother laughed and cried at the same time. My father sat down on the floor so he could be at Grace's level, and within 10 minutes she was climbing on his back and calling him grandpa like she had been doing it her whole life. I stood in the doorway and watched. This was what Daniel had taken from us. This exact moment, multiplied across 9 years. Birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesdays. The sound of a granddaughter's laugh in a house that had been missing it. I felt the grief of it, and I felt the gratitude of it, and I understood for the first time that both things can be true at once. Daniel received a formal reprimand, a federal investigation referral, and the end of his contracting career. I did not celebrate. I am not built for celebration when someone falls, even someone who hurt me. The Army taught me that winning isn't the point. Integrity is the point. You do the right thing because it's right, and the outcome takes care of itself. But I will say this. When I drove home that night from my parents' house, with Grace asleep in the backseat and my husband's hand in mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in 9 years. I felt like I was allowed to be home. My name is Sunita Marshall. I am a major in the United States Army. I have served this country in places that would make most people's hands shake just to hear about. My brother told my parents I failed. I walked into his military hearing in full dress blues, and I let the truth speak for itself. My mother couldn't breathe. My dad's hands were shaking. And my daughter called them grandma and grandpa like she had always known them. Sometimes the truth takes 9 years, but it always shows up. Always. Major Sunita Marshall, U.S. Army.